Part 3. World War I and the interwar years. The period 1900 until 1914 is often seen as Folkestone's golden age. As local author Anne Neville put it in her book, The Story of Folkestone, the declaration of war on the 14th of August 1914 marked the end of this golden era. A village which had been transformed into a major watering place for people from London and other major urban areas in the space of 50 years, that had built grand hotels like the Grand and the Metropole, overlooking the sweeping pristine lawns of the Leas, and had become popular with writers and celebrities of the day, such as H.G. Wells, who built the unusual Spade House in Sandgate. All this was brought crashing down by war on the continent. And being so close to the continent, it was obvious Folkestone would be more immediately affected than elsewhere. It was also unfortunate that the onslaught of World War I started at the height of the season, with the town full of holidaymakers. The town emptied as if struck by a plague hoe. Hotels and boarding houses were deserted. In 2 weeks, Belgium was overrun by the Germans, and an army of refugees fled to Britain, landing at the port of Folkestone. In all, 100,000 refugees passed through the port. Indeed, it was even rumoured that the Belgian royal family were to stay at the Grand. Folkestone's menfolk flocked to enlist in the army, 3,500 in all. On the plus side, thousands of soldiers, especially from Canada, poured into the town and had to be fed, entertained and of course transported. In an effort to help the war, a lot of the horses were sent to the front, leaving the chief mode of local transport short of horsepower. The Sandgate tram literally was stuck. Although the town was only slightly affected by enemy action, one terrible raid on Tonton Street brought carnage with 71 civilians killed. Nevertheless, as war went on, food got scarcer and the town got dilapidated and dirty. Roads subject to heavy military traffic became rutted, little more than muddy tracks. Gone were the days of bands, concerts and fashionable holidaymakers. Instead, the place looked sad and exhausted from all the effects of war. Even the precious Leas grass got muddy. After the First World War, sometimes known as the Great War, Folkestone gradually recovered and became a respectable holiday resort again. However, it was not the same exclusive resort. Wealthy families that visited before the war found fresh destinations. The Riviera became part fashionable. It was more accessible thanks to improved boat and railway services. Life continued in the small town as television was just being invented along the coast by Mr. Logie Beard. Going to the cinema seemed to be a common pastime, with also the new emergence of cinema or picture theatre as it was called. Other pastimes seemed to be dancing and listening to bands and orchestras on the Leas bandstand. The local council seemed to be prominent role checking whether meat was edible. Regular issues came up like the sewers. Also, building of the Leas Cliff Hall occupied their time. However, all was not rosy and there was a real concern about poverty. Several charitable bodies were active helping the welfare of the poor. One colourfully named group was the Brotherhood of Cheerful Sparrows, who on Jan the 9th, 1922, catered for over 1,400 poor children of Folkestone to tea at a drill hall in Shallant Street. It was reported long before the advertised opening, a surging mass of children of all ages gathered outside the hall. The children were admitted into the hall, decorated with flags and a Christmas tree, and were served with an array of fancy cakes, plain and currant buns. The law was harsh. Shops were fined for opening late. Theft of a pair of shoes meant a prison sentence, whilst a boy stealing an apple was given a final warning. There seemed to be an under-concern about the welfare of the labouring classes, most of which lived in the east part of Folkestone. The Independent Labour Party and the Labour Party had regular meetings in Shallen Street. An unemployed workers' union was formed in the town, and in May 1926 the general strike lasted for 9 days, was of real concern for the authorities, and resulted in some food shortages. As Folkestone Herald reported in May 1926, Folkestone is feeling the effects of the greatest strike which had occurred in the history of our country from Monday night. Although Folkestone is not an industrial centre, yet a number of men are employed on the railway, and they are first organised body to go on strike. This is dealing a great blow to the well-being of our country. As most of these men worked on Dover's own Junction station, it was no surprise when both the railwaymen and the men in the harbour stopped work. After this came a most unusual event. The striker marched in procession down Dover Road on the Friday with 150 railwaymen from Dover who had marched all the way from Dover. The procession included a drum and fife band who contributed march tunes. The men marched in sections of 4s. In the procession was a large banner bearing the words "Folkestone and District Demand Justice." Some of the songs they sang included Rule Britannia, and they were joined, the local paper noticed, by a number of women wearing red rosettes. The striker then proceeded to the Canterbury Road Recreation Ground, where a large meeting was addressed by speakers from Dover and Folkestone. After the meeting, the procession reformed and went through the various streets of the town before the Dover visitors returned to their own town. The following day, the Folkestone workers did the return trip to Dover. Although this was described as a crisis which took local police time and resulted in real shortages, for example, permits had to be obtained to get coal, which was a vital source of fuel at the time, it was mostly good-natured, and there was a place for a touch of wit. One smart Alec sighted the strikers processing down the street and inquired, "Whose funeral's taking place?" And one of the strikers exclaimed, when he saw the way the procession was holding, "Good Lord, he's going to bury us now."